Hi, I'm former Buffalo Bills wide receiver Don Beebe, and you're listening to Nate and the Fellas on Circling the Wagons podcast, because nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills. Go Bills.
Where else would you rather be than right here, right now?
Hey, hey, let's go Buffalo! Hey, hey, let's go Buffalo!
The Bills make me wanna shout!
Welcome to the Circling the Wagons podcast, a podcast discussing the Bills all year round with interviews, news, recaps, and insightful fan discussion. Most times. Here's your host and lifelong Bills fan, Nate.
Hey, Bills Mafia. Welcome to another episode of Circling the Wagons, a Buffalo Bills fan podcast. I am your host, Nate. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a minute. We haven't talked together since... live, at least. I've released a few throwback episodes, but we haven't talked together since the schedule thing. So this will be good. Good. Hope all your summers have been going well. So we're going to talk about a lot of things in this episode. We're going to talk about the main training camp stories that we're going to be watching with training camp. Training camp's, it's a week and a half away. It's crazy. It's showing up so quickly. We're going to talk about that. We have some emails from listeners. We have some announcements, a big announcement to make for Circling the Wagons podcast channel. And so we joined a podcast channel. We have a lot of things to discuss as far as that goes, which I want to clue all of you listeners in on. People that have been following us for a while, people that are new to our podcast. I want to give you guys a heads up for that. But first, I'm joined by my co-host, John, in this episode. John, it's been a while since we've talked. How are you doing, man? It's so good to talk to you.
Doing great. This is the year. Let's go.
This is the year. So real quick, can I start the episode off with that sentiment? Because I've been talking to say, we're basically like a water cooler Bills fan podcast, right? I've been talking to some friends over text, over phone, in person, and they're like, I'm not feeling very confident about the Bills this year. And you know us, because we've talked about the Bills for the last 7-8 years on this podcast. So I'm like, okay, why aren't you confident? And so they give a list of reasons, the defense, losing Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White, losing Mitch Morse, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, a lot of losses there. A lot of losses. And then, you think about it, the division could be getting better with Aaron Rodgers coming back. So there's a lot of things to be, slightly, I wouldn't say worried about, but maybe possibly concerned about in Bills fans' eyes. John, when you hear all those things, and I know you're the super optimistic Bills fan, do you ever get worried about all the things I mentioned, or are you in a pretty good place, knowing the future and thinking that this actually could be the year?
No, I'm pretty optimistic, and they're still the best team in the AFC East and one of the best teams in the AFC, if not the best. We will see this year. But no, I'm not that worried, and I'm also not worried about the future. I think the things that they've done, getting out from under Diggs' contract this year, they take the cap hit this year, but not next year. So next year they can reload again, wherever they see fit. So they're still one of the contenders this year, and they can reload again next year if need be. So I think that the future is still there for us. Like we could win it this year and next year. Like, let's go.
Yeah, I'm very optimistic about the Bills this year for a number of different reasons. When people say that Stephon Diggs isn't there, that Bills don't have a true number one wide receiver, I agree with that. We don't have one yet, though, is my rebuttal to that. We don't have one yet. It doesn't mean that we don't have one on the roster. It doesn't mean that we don't have one yet that stood out. If you just want to go from the Diggs perspective, if we want to concentrate on that, Diggs wasn't really a factor at the second half of last season, even into the playoffs. He was targeted, but he was an afterthought in the offense. The Bills found ways to win without Stephon Diggs. And honestly, for Gabe Davis for a bunch of that too, because he was injured. He just, Gabe Davis, it was either 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, or it was, 6 targets, 0 catches, there was no in between. And it was a lot more of the latter than the former. And I like Gabe Davis, but there's nothing to say that Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, and Khalil Shakir can't be wide receiver ones. And I think at worst case scenario, we have 3 wide receiver twos. I think we're in a good spot on offense from that point of view. And Dalton Kincaid gets another year. I mean, you're talking about a young receiving core, sure, but like there's a lot of potential. And Josh Allen, for almost his entire career, has gotten the best out of his receivers. That like he got the best season out of Stephon Diggs, he got the best season out of Cole Beasley, he got the best season out of John Brown. Like he's a good quarterback. He elevates the play of his players. Maybe Curtis Samuel didn't got a raw deal between Washington and so is it Sam Howell at quarterback in Washington? You have Teddy Bridgewater in Carolina. I mean I think there's a lot of potential. Do I see him being a Stephon Diggs? No. Could he be like a Deebo Samuel light? Absolutely. Could Keon Coleman be Mike Evans? Maybe. It's not likely because there's not that many Mike Evans, but could he be like Mike Evans light? Who wouldn't take that? Like all these things I think are possible. So from that standpoint, from the offense, especially with, bringing James Cook into the mix a lot in the second half and making him a better receiving threat out of the backfield. And then also, like I mentioned, Dalton Kincaid getting another year of experience. I think he's going to be one of their best receivers. I mean, there's a lot to be excited about on the Bills offense.
Yeah, listening to you talk about receiver, and I'm counting like 13 receivers right now, as we, mid-July. I think there's only one that's caught a pass in the regular season from Josh Allen, Khalil Shakir. Is there anybody else that has on that entire wide receiver unit?
Not one. Not one has. And that includes like Chase Claypool. I mean, obviously like all the Bills.
Yeah, they got, they signed guys and but
yeah,
that's very interesting. I am high in Shakir, obviously, from our previous talks. Love Keon Coleman, and I do like the Curtis Samuel move. So those are expected to be the top three guys anyway, but it is interesting that the only one guy in the entire roster for wide receiver is caught a pass from Josh Allen.
Yeah, that is a good point, John. I hadn't thought of it like that. Obviously the Bills have like Mac Hollins on the roster, Chase Claypool. Like, I like that the Bills are trying to go after this as like, let's platoon this position. Like if Chase Claypool ends up being a diamond in the rough, great. Me personally, I don't expect anything out of him. If he even makes the roster, like that'll be a really, good sign that he's on his way ascending and he could actually be something this season for us. But as of right now, I don't really expect anything. But yeah, Khalil Shakir,
you have a few players like that, like Claypool, but also MVS and Hamler. Isabella is still on the roster. Like they got a bunch of players there, but they're all low risk. Like they don't have a lot invested in any of those guys. So as long as one of them hit, like that's great.
Exactly. I completely didn't even mention MVS. That's a good one. Did you know Khalil Shakir is working out with Eric Moulds in the offseason? Did you see that?
I didn't. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a good sign. Yeah, love
Big
Moulds.
guy. Yeah.
Is Moulds your favorite wide receiver that you've seen, non-Hall of Fame wide receiver? Because Andre Reed, we saw as kids. Like, Andre was amazing to see live. But, next to that, if you're not talking Stephon Diggs, because, we're not talking like current players, former wide receivers, it's got to be him, right? Him or Lee Evans or something. Like he's so fun to watch.
Guys that I've seen with my own eyes, real time. Like you could go back to Dabinian and
who exactly
Golden Wheels, from the '60s and stuff.
Was that someone's name? Was that someone's name? Golden Wheels?
This is his nickname. Yeah.
Oh, his nickname. Oh, Dabinian. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you.
But yeah, there are a few guys. They had Jerry Butler, who played for the Steelers too, or was it Frank Lewis? One of the two. James Lofton.
He was
at the tail end of it. No, I think Eric Moulds is very high up there for me, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. There were a lot of fun guys to watch. Like Lee Evans was fun when he catch a deep ball. Like, don't get me wrong. Like I like Lee Evans. I liked, Peerless Price when he was with the Bills. I like Don Beebe. Obviously, like those guys were fun. But like all around, like you just love this guy. And if it's not Stephon Diggs, and it's still a little painful. He just left. Like Stephon Diggs is definitely my favorite wide receiver in the modern era since the drought or whatever. Like in that frame. But like Eric Moulds was just like, he could have been. I don't want to say Calvin Johnson if he had had better quarterback play, but he could have been an Andre Johnson. Like I think he could have been that caliber player with better quarterback play.
Yeah, he was really good. He had to be one of the top few drought players. You got Kyle Williams. He might be number one.
Yeah.
But who else do they had? Aaron Schobel. Fred Jackson was a fan favorite.
Fred Jackson.
But
you include like Eric Wood in that because he was there when I think after they made the playoffs. So like he was drought era because he started before they made the playoffs. So yeah. I mean, there's definitely a fan favorite for sure. I can't think of much more off the top of my head. So yeah, so I feel
Terrence
good.
McGee.
Terrence
maybe.
McGee. Oh,
I don't
love
know.
Terrence McGee.
Roscoe, remember?
Oh,
Let's go, Roscoe.
I mean, I liked him. He wasn't good, but I liked him. Like he was all right. Was he one of those guys that got hit or injured every time he got hit, or am I thinking of someone else?
Well, Roscoe is a punt returner.
Punt returner, yeah.
I mean, he played receiver too, but
he was one of those guys. It's just like Isaiah McKenzie. Like you think he's gonna like have this potential to be this gadget player, like this Percy Harvin or something, and then he just like just
they had Percy Harvin for a little while.
Yeah, for a minute they're like, now we got our Percy Harvin finally, and then he like retired. So I mean, I'm excited. I think that I think the biggest loss, looking at it, obviously Stephon Diggs is a big loss, but like we mentioned, when Joe Brady took over for the offense and really took a hold of the playbook, and he didn't phase out Diggs, but like Diggs got it wasn't quite the same game plan. The Bills still did well offensively and were able to score points, and they looked actually the best they had looked all season. But on the defensive side, I will say that one of the biggest losses is definitely like, that Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer duo in the backfield. And I think that that's something that like we're not used to seeing. We're not used to seeing the Bills get beat over the top. Like I legitimately can't remember the last time the Bills were beat for like an 80-yard touchdown. Like that just didn't happen in like the last 6-7 years since Hyde and Poyer have been around. So I think that's going to take some adjusting. I think there might actually be a few of those plays this season just because between, Mike Edwards at safety and Taylor Rapp, like I like those guys, but they're not Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, at least as of yet. So, and obviously Cole Bishop could be in there. I think Cole Bishop could fight, Taylor Rapp for that role at strong safety. He's definitely more athletic. I mean, the dude's an athletic freak. That's why he was drafted in the second round. Like, it's a good player. I don't know if he's going to start this year, but long term, he's definitely the starter.
I agree 100%. I like Cole Bishop a lot. I think that was a great pick. And I like the Mike Edwards signing. I think that was sneaky. I mean, much like when they brought in Poyer and Hyde to begin with, Edwards is kind of like, he's got the experience and he's coming in from somewhere else. It kind of reminded me a little bit of that, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, it's not. I don't want Bills fans to get worried or anything, but like, there's a lot to be excited about. The other area where I think there might be not possible concern. I won't even say concern. Possible concern is center, and that's with Connor McGovern taking over at center. So let's go into our like biggest training camp storylines going into training camp, because training camp starts July 24th. It's St. John Fisher, like it has the last 2 decades. I have no idea. I can't remember. I remember when they first came here to Rochester, because we live in the Rochester area. I remember being like, this is so amazing because Fredonia is so far away from us, right? Like I think even if you ask like people that live in Buffalo, they're like, I don't really want to drive to Fredonia for like a Bills practice. Like that's a good drive. That's a good hike. So that was nice that it ended up right down the street from us. But John, I'm going to give you one of my biggest storylines, and that kind of like led into what I was just saying, is Connor McGovern at center. Now, the question is, like, everyone's been talking up Connor McGovern this offseason, the coaching staff, Brandon Beane, even, his former Penn State head coach there, or offensive line coach in the Tim Graham article at The Athletic. Like, everyone loves Connor McGovern. He was truly made to play center. Like, that's what he says his natural position is. Like, I'm interested to see what happens, because I loved Mitch Morris. Like, of all the guys that were released in the offseason, or cut, however you want to say it, it sucked losing White, Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, like I mentioned. But at least with those guys, like, you kind of understood. It was injuries, it was age, a lot of things were going against them. What I didn't think necessarily was Mitch Morris, because I think he's only like 30, 31, but like the injuries were an issue. Any concussion at any given time could have been the end of it. But I liked Mitch Morris a lot. Not going to rehash that. We talked about that in a previous episode. But that's my biggest, storyline. One of the bigger storylines I have going into the training camp is, how is Connor McGovern going to run this offensive line, which I think we can agree, John, was one of the best offensive lines we've seen in a while last season, protecting Josh Allen, getting the ball running, or getting the ball going. Spencer Brown had one of his best seasons. Like, Aaron Kromer probably deserves most of the credit for getting the offensive line. But I'm sure they talked to Aaron Kromer. I'm sure they said, hey, do you feel like if we get rid of if we release Mitch Morris, that we can infill him with a guy like Connor McGovern. Can you run a scheme where he can, block to the best of his ability? And I'm sure he gave the sign off for, So I don't go in thinking he's going to be as good as Mitch Morris, but I feel more confident now than I did initially at the time, of the release and hearing that he was going to be the starter. I feel a little bit better about that, even though he hasn't taken to snap at least a good number of snaps in the NFL at center.
Yeah, it was one of the more unexpected moves for sure. He does have the injury history, and he was one of the more pricier contracts. So I get it now in retrospect, but when he was out, when he was injured, it wasn't good at center. But at the same time, McGovern wasn't playing center. It's not like they moved him over because they didn't have another guard to play guard. So we'll have to see. But it's encouraging to know that like they just like one of the guys that were filling in for Mitch Morris isn't the guy that's starting, right? It's one of the guards that can play center. So we'll see. They did bring in Will Clapp, and then they also drafted Cedric Van Brand Granger out of Georgia. So they do have some insurance there as well. So I think they're going to be fine. They seem optimistic. I'm optimistic. But yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same players that were subbing in for Morris when it went all wrong last few years. So,
what about David Edwards getting his first starts at left guard for the Buffalo Bills? I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, we're going to see how he does in the scheme. But again, hoping that they talked to Aaron Kromer is like, do you think this guy can handle the scheme? And they said, yes, we're going to re-sign him because we like what he can do.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part why McGovern can move over to center, because now they can have Edwards starting a guard with Torrance on the other side.
Dude, if you had to guess, so like prediction time, right? You have Connor McGovern at center. You have Will Clapp, like you just mentioned, the free agent out of, I think, the Chargers. And then Cedric Van Pran Granger, their 5th round pick out of Georgia, the center out of Georgia, which I was like, that was honestly one of my favorite picks. Like, I love the idea that they got an SEC, starting center. Like, long term, it's just insurance, right? Like, short term, he might be more guard depth or center depth or whatever. But like, if you had to guess how reps are going to go for the Buffalo Bills in training camp, obviously Connor McGovern is going to get the most of the starting center snaps. But you know how they like to mix guys in when they want to give their starters a rest, and that's usually a good sign of who they like at the backup position, and they'll switch that sometimes. Sometimes on day 1 it'll be Will Clapp. Sometimes on day 2 it'll be Cedric Van Pran Granger, right? Like, you don't know. If you had to guess of how the snaps are going to line up between Clapp and Van Pran Granger, like where do you put Clapp up against the rookie, and how do you see that like kind of folding out? Because I have some thoughts. I was curious where you see that going. That's
a really good question. I was wondering if it'd be like a 50-50 type split for that backup position, because they're not going to, I don't see them keeping 3 just centers unless they think one of these other guys is versatile enough to play guard as well, right?
Yep.
I don't know all of Will Clapp's history, if he can do that, but
no, I think he was a mid-tier, very mid signing,
Yeah. But yeah, and they got a lot of other guys on the roster that are versatile and can play tackle or guard. I mean, Rand Vandermark, I know they like a lot. Alec Anderson, Tommy Doyle still on the roster. Lil Collins, they have now a couple other guys, plus the other draft picks and undrafted guys. Yeah, that's. I think the offensive line depth is going to be. Yeah, the offensive line for the offense in general, offensive line depth and wide receiver depth are going to be the 2 biggest things. Quarterback is going to be set. Tight end is going to be set. Running backs mostly going to be set. Is it going to be Darrington Evans, Frank Gore Jr. type of thing?
Yeah, we just don't know who the 3rd running back will be, right? Like, I mean, we know
Ray Davis. It'll be Ty Johnson, site number 2, right?
It's got to be, right? It's got to be Ty
right.
Johnson. But like, what happens because I think they only keep 3 running backs, maybe 4 if they do special teams. But like, Ty Johnson does special teams, so he'll be there. They liked him. I mean, we all liked Ty Johnson last year, right? Yeah. So now it's a matter of, is it going to be Darrington Evans or Frank Gore Jr.? I mean,
yeah, Ray Davis will keep because he's a 4th rounder.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's 3, and then who's their 4th? Darrington Evans or Frank Gore?
Exactly. And I kind of want, like, I have no problem with Darrington Evans. Like, he's kind of like a bounce around. They've had him on the roster before as like a practice squad guy or whatever. I kind of want Frank Gore Jr. to make the roster. Like, can we just say, so
Yeah.
I want to stop the conversation real quick about the offensive line and say, who is your favorite, like, training camp? Who do you predict to be the training camp darling for the Buffalo Bills? Because if we were looking at like low round draft picks or like undrafted free agents, I feel like it's got to be Frank Gore Jr. Like, who in Bills Mafia is not going to be waiting to see how Frank Gore Jr. is doing, especially when his dad just played for us like 3 years ago, right? Like 4 years ago. Like, this is an interesting player, and I think a position that I think fans are going to be watching. Like, how's he doing? Is he beating out Ty Johnson? Is he beating out Tarrington Evans? Like, how's he doing?
I don't know. I might actually bounce back to the offensive line. Keaton Bills, like, what a name. Out of Utah, undrafted free agent. Like, let's go.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good point. Okay, all right. I stand corrected. I stand corrected. Okay, Keaton Bills number 1, Frank Gore Jr. number 2. That's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
I remember when Gore was still in the league and like his kid was in college and people were like, I wonder if they're going to both be in the NFL at the same time.
Dude, when Frank Gore was with us, what was he, like 36 or 37 or something like that? Like, right? Like, it was crazy.
And he still had some good plays. Like, he was still doing it. Like,
he wasn't bad. He was better than Mike Tolbert was for us. Remember that train wreck? Like, that tire fire having Mike Tolbert as like our running back 1 or 2. I can't even remember at that point. This is peak drought era, but I liked Frank Gore when he was here. So I think my prediction is, besides Keaton Bills for obvious reasons as an interior offensive lineman, and dude, I'm going to be rooting for him for sure. I want a Bills jersey. Who doesn't want a Bills jersey? Who doesn't want this guy to somehow make the league, or make the team? But if I was going like low round draft pick, I think Frank Gore Jr. is going to be like the big name people are going to watch, and I'm curious to see how he does. Like, obviously MVS, like you mentioned, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but he's a veteran wide receiver, so it's not quite the same. Chase Claypool, I know Bills Mafia is going to be watching for sure. I'm going to be watching. Other positions. So John, let me know what you think about this. Training camp darlings. One of our listeners emailed in, and I can't stop thinking about it since they emailed in, but like, dude, Javon Solomon, the defensive end out of Troy, I think it was a 5th or 6th round pick like this year. He led the FBS in sacks. Like, I'm not saying like Troy is a different, it's not the same conference. It's not the same, area of college football. I get it. And he's kind of on the smaller side, but dude, I'm kind of really interested to see how he does in a position room where like the Bills don't really have a big sack artist, right? They have Gregory Rousseau, like the veteran. They just give the 5th-year option to, so he's going to be here for at least another season. I think he's the long-term solution. Von Miller, which is another big storyline for the training camp. How is Von Miller going to do? Is he going to return to 2022 Von Miller, or is he going to be 2023 Von Miller, where he was basically a mannequin out there? Like, no, wasn't a whole lot to show out there. I think Gabe Davis had more tackles than Von Miller did in his in the season. So there's plenty of room for a guy to step up. I mean, AJ Epinesa, I think we kind of know what we have with AJ Epinesa. I think he's a solid depth defensive end, but he's not. I think his upside is, kind of capped a little bit. I'm curious to see what Javon Solomon's going to do. I think he's one of my, like, I'm definitely going to be watching. And if he does anything in camp, I think he becomes a training camp darling.
When you think about, there's been a lot of talk over the last year about Kingsley Jonathan.
You love Kingsley Jonathan because of his last name. I know.
No. No.
You have him like highlighted on your spreadsheet and everyone else is all whited out. It's like in big font. Kingsley, dude, I like Kingsley Jonathan. I like him a lot. I'm glad they kept him. Whenever we saw, what was nice about the Buffalo Bills this last offseason and in preseason when they would start their like second and third string guys, like the Bills actually had depth for once on the defensive line. I mean, you saw, Cameron Klein, Kingsley Jonathan, like guys like get pressure in the fourth quarter. I'm like, where is this? So I like Kingsley Jonathan. Don't get me wrong. I think that I would love for him to at least make the practice squad, maybe a depth player if he continues to play as well as he had in training camp last season and the preseason. But I know he won't make it over Javon Solomon, right? So you're talking if you're going to keep 4 defensive ends, it's going to be Rousseau, Epinesa, Miller, and Solomon. So who's the fifth guy going to be? Probably Casey Toohill, the free agent that they signed. But Kingsley Jonathan could easily either squeak in there if there's an injury, or I think he makes the practice squad. But I like him. What do you think?
Yeah, there's some players there. Like that's another battle. Like the depth at edge. I really hope Von Miller returns to form. Like this is going to be the last shot, really, beginning of the year here.
Yeah. Do you think so? Obviously, that article, we haven't talked in a few weeks. The article came out where he talked with somebody and he's like, I shouldn't have even been playing, this and that. It basically didn't take any responsibility, but he didn't throw anyone under the bus. But like saying he shouldn't have been playing, where you kind of implies like, hey, why shouldn't you have been playing? Were you still injured? So like when I hear that, John, at first I'm like, why is the coaching staff putting him out there if he's not ready? But then I know this coaching staff. McDermott. He's been here for 7-8 years now. Like we know him. He does not put guys out there unless he thinks they're ready to play. You know what I mean? Like he will not risk someone unless he absolutely has to. If anything, he's more conservative than he should be with bringing players back. So when I first saw that, I'm like, why did McDermott play him if he wasn't ready? And then I'm like, oh, I don't think I trust Von Miller. I don't think Von Miller's telling the truth necessarily. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he said he shouldn't have been playing, and it was his own fault, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Either mentally or physically, he wasn't ready.
Yeah. I mean, he showed a couple of flashes on a couple of plays towards the end of the year again. Maybe, with this offseason, he'll be back again. That's what we can hope. Just really stinks because before, like, when they acquired him, before he got hurt, he was playing really well.
Oh, yeah.
It's just unfortunate he got hurt.
Oh, very, very unfortunate. I would say that, like, if we had that 2022 Von Miller the last 2 seasons, like to end 2023 after he got that injury in Thanksgiving, and then last year, 20 whatever. Like if we had him at the end of that season and last season, like we might be talking a different scenario as far as the Bills' postseason outcome. Like that would have made a huge difference because we looked at last season, like you said, he turned it on at the end of the season enough that like you thought he might start peaking, right? Like, and then he just didn't show up. Like we were hoping, as Bills fans trying to be optimistic, it just didn't happen. We're hoping. I think he's pissed off. I think this is an angry future Hall of Famer, Von Miller, who says that he sees people that don't think he can do it. And I think he's trying to prove them wrong. So this is easily, it's going to be like last year where he's absolutely nothing, or I think he's going to return to like a decent portion of 2022 Von Miller. Like I'm betting more off. I think he's going to have like 8-9 sacks easily this season. Like he's going to be a starter and he's going to do okay.
I could definitely say he's betting on himself. You saw he took a pay cut this year, and it's they converted a lot of the stuff to incentive based. So like he has to be productive in order to earn the money back. And so he's, he thinks he can do it, obviously. And I think that's both good for him and the team to do it that way, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Give him credit for that. And saying that. So like, yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting. He's one of the biggest training camp storylines is how is Von Miller going to be? How is he going to look? Like, is he going to look back to the 2022 Von Miller, or are we getting last season's Von Miller? That's one of the biggest, training camp storylines. Another big training camp storyline is going to be Kaiir Elam, the cornerback, the first-round draft pick 3 years ago out of Florida. The Bills did not extend Rasul Douglas this last offseason. There's part of me that thinks that like they're really betting on Kaiir Elam to show up in 2024 and play a big role. So much so that they don't think that they need to re-sign Rasul Douglas because they'll like what they have in Kaiir Elam. And in mandatory minicamps, it was across the board. Bills beat reporters were saying how good Kaiir Elam has looked. And you haven't heard a ton of that in either offseason, his first 2 off seasons. Like, I don't know why he's not climbing up the depth chart. Like, he should be taking this. He seems lost at times. You heard all those narratives, but like this last mandatory minicamp, they're like Kaiir Elam again stands out. Like he's showing up. Like, and he was getting playing time because Rasul Douglas didn't show up for mandatory minicamp. So like, you're looking at this and you're like, this might be something Christian Benford, Rasul Douglas, Kaiir Elam. I mean, if Kaiir Elam finally lives up to his potential in year 3, like I'm all for it. I think this is a good trio of cornerbacks, probably potentially the best in the league, and all of a sudden, it becomes like a good piece to a strength on that Bills secondary. So, and obviously you have Taron Johnson at the nickel, who's one of the best in the league, but like I'm interested to see how Kaiir Elam's going to do it. I'm going to be following that situation closely. Just in case people, like players will tweak something in practice. Maybe it's Douglas or Benford and Kaiir Elam's going to get more snaps. How's he going to do? What's he going to do with them? How is he going to play out? Is he going to show flashes? Is he going to even make a run for a starting opportunity in 2024, either over Douglas or Benford?
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath for Elam. I think it's going to be Benford, Douglas, and Johnson. I am worried about the depth. However, I do like Jamarcus Ingram. But aside from that, the depth isn't the best. I know Cam Lewis can do a little bit of both corner and safety. They didn't draft anybody in the 7 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was at least one undrafted guy.
I mean, they drafted Daquan Hardy out of Penn State, but he's mostly a nickel corner.
Oh yeah, Daquan Hardy, yeah,
but like he's mostly Taron Johnson's backup, and he's a punt returner, so like he's going to make the team. But yeah, it's nothing at the edge, at least as of now. Maybe they switch him over there, maybe they give him some looks, but
right. So I mean, if Kaiir Elam does work out, I think it's going to be great depth. I don't see him overtaking the other guys necessarily.
I mean, it would be interesting because the guy has athleticism, length. He just hasn't proven it. I mean, he's shown flashes, at least compared to like other guys. Like you can say he showed flashes. Do
you think it's a system thing or
I think
a mental thing? I don't know.
I think it's a little bit of a system thing because he was more of a man coverage cornerback and he's kind of in a more zone-based scheme with McDermott. But at the same time, I think it was just like, I think a lot of these rookies and younger players, like it's just too much for them. And there's too many thoughts going on in their head and things that they're not used to doing at the college level. Like I think mentally it can be what's the word? Overwhelming. That's what I meant to say. It's overwhelming, right? So like they're trying to think, if you have to like do what you're doing and you get to like, it's getting closer to the season and he has to think too much about what he has to do instead of just relying on his instincts and just knowing the playbook well enough that he has to do this, or this. Like coaches are going to look at that and say like, he's not ready. And I think that's what happened with Kaiir Elam. I'm just guessing, completely pulling it out of my backside, but I think that's from what I've heard at press conferences, from what coaches have said, from what people that actually know film have said, like it seems to be a mental thing as opposed to a physical thing. So we'll see. Maybe he's finally starting to put it in place because it's the same defensive scheme that he's had since he's been here. So it's not a new system.
It's funny you mentioned playbook, and the first thing I thought of was Billy Joe Hobart. The post-game press conference. He's like, "Yeah, I didn't really look at the playbook."
And they're like, "Yeah, it looked like he threw 3 picks, and
then they got rid of him.
They got rid of him
like within the next day or whatever.
Within the next day, they released him, and then also, like, I don't think he might have gotten a shot or 2 after that, but he never stuck anywhere. You know? Whereas like Nathan Peterman threw 4 interceptions in 1 half, and he is still in the NFL somehow. Like he's just
was it 4 or 5?
It might have been 5. Like
it felt like 20. Let me tell you.
Oh man,
it was the Ravens too, of course. Like,
dude, if anyone's out of the NFL, should be upset that they haven't gotten a shot back in the NFL, like Cam Newton or one of those other guys. They just have to look at Nathan Peterman and be like, "How did this happen? Like, how am I not a backup when this guy is?" Like it's insane. I have a feeling like those guys definitely think the league is against you, right? Another big training camp storyline that we'll be following as a fan base and a podcast will be, I mentioned it earlier, Bobby Babbage. The scheme will be mostly the same. I'm sure Bobby Babbage will put his wrinkles into Sean McDermott's scheme, but who will be calling the plays on Sunday when the season goes on? Right, like that's a big deal, and nobody's committed. They haven't committed to anything yet. Like, said when Bobby's ready, he'll be taking over. Like, I'm looking at this from what I know of Sean McDermott, how I think he is as a coach, and this is his scheme. Now, he didn't really interfere with Leslie Frazier when Leslie Frazier was here because I think Frazier he respected. He'd been here for 30 years or whatever. He'd been in the league for so long. He played. He was in the league. Like, I think he just respected Frazier too much to step on his toes. I think he respected him a little too much, in my opinion. I feel like he should have been a little bit more authoritative with how Frazier called his defense, because we saw last year, and I loved the way Sean McDermott called his defense. It was just more aggressive. It was more diverse. It was more hidden. Like, you didn't know what coverage was going to roll. Like, he fooled a lot of like good quarterbacks into throwing interceptions or making the wrong reads. Like, I loved the way, I wished Sean McDermott was running the defense from the time he got here, right? But now it's Bobby Babich. I don't think he's going to give him the same leeway as he would a Leslie Frazier, who's been here forever, right? Because this is Bobby Babich's first time. It would be his first time calling plays as a defensive coordinator. John, what do you think? How do you think that that's going to play out? Do you think he's going to be more conservative, or do you think he's just going to hand the reins over? I
think that McDermott's going to want to probably still have a big hand in the defense, in the play calling. I feel like he did more with less last year. Obviously, Trey White got hurt again, and Von Miller was hurt still, and Milano went down, and then Bernard went down, and
I know we're missing someone else. Daquan Jones went down.
Yeah,
Daquan Jones.
So there was a lot of injuries, and the defense was still going really strong all the way up until the last game. Like, was the last straw that broke the camel's back. Nobody could cover Travis Kelce because all their guys were hurt. But I really liked McDermott. I like Frazier. I like Frazier and his defense, but I also like McDermott and his defense. And I think he did more with less. So I would go that route.
Yeah, I think that I'm pretty much settling about where you are. I think he's going to, because like there's at no point in training camp or the preseason can you feel confident in like, oh, Bobby Babich has it. Like, he's ready. Like, he might be like, that's one of those things where like until the bullets are flying, like you can't just practice being a coordinator and calling plays, right? Because in the preseason, it's all vanilla. Nobody wants to give away anything. And, in training camp, you're playing your own offense. So it's not quite the same. I mean, you're scheming, but it's like, it's like
you could make an argument like, oh, well, maybe McDermott can focus more on the overall, but then was he that good on the overall before? It seems about the same. So maybe if the overall's the same either way, and the defense might be a little bit better, then
Yeah. Maybe keep him as a play caller, you're saying, right? Like, yeah, I know. He showed a lot last year, which was, a question mark going into the season. How was McDermott going to do as both a head coach and a play caller? And I think we liked his defense a lot. Like you said, he did more with less, it felt like, than Frazier did. I think he waits. I think he eases Bobby Babich into it until he feels confident in handing over the reins completely in a game plan. I think he mentors him. I think this season is at least part of it is going to be a mentorship in like, okay, let's see, this is what we're going to, he's been under McDermott for how many years now? Like six years or whatever it is, working his way up through the ranks. Obviously McDermott loves him. He was getting defensive coordinator interviews before he got hired by the Bills as their defensive coordinator. If McDermott wanted to do it himself, he would have, but he obviously saw something in him. I think he's just not going to just, like those other teams that were interviewing, Babich would have handed it over day one, be like, here it is. Like you're now the defensive coordinator for the Dolphins, right? Like that, they would have done that. But I think McDermott's going to ease him into it. Maybe it takes a year. Maybe it takes only a few games. Like, I think he's going to kind of be with him and say, and
a lot's going to really depend on McDermott and his, like, every coach is different. And a lot of coaches being like in that leadership role are going to have a difficult time letting certain things delegating, right?
Yep.
Delegating can be hard for some people.
Dude, delegating is hard for me at work. I'm like, I can just do this. I don't know how to teach someone, or like, yeah.
I can just do it now and not spend the time.
It's like having kids, like having kids. Like, do I teach them how to do this chore? I'm like, I'm just going to do it in 10 seconds as opposed to taking the 5 minutes to teach them, right? Like, but at the same time, it's important to teach them because they won't learn if you keep doing it
Right.
yourself, right? Like so yeah, it's and I think McDermott, I wouldn't say he's a control freak, because control freak makes it sound like, because like people don't like micromanagers and control freaks. I think he
No.
does. Like I think he has an overall general. He's very rigid on the overall
He
scope
seems
of what he wants.
meticulous and
And like
thorough and meticulous. I'd say.
Yeah. Like he'll say I want intensity, but he might not say I want intensity from this player at this time in the game specifically, like right at training camp, or they're doing training camp. Like I want the intensity to go up. Like he'll just say that overall, like this should be, the defense needs to bring it, or the offense or whatever. The lines, I want to see that.
Yeah, more training camp fights. Let's go.
Yeah.
We need something for the media.
Oh man, that's so good. I love when they do that. As long as no one gets hurt, as long as no one like breaks an orbital bone, like Steve. What is his name? Steve. Who is the wide receiver out of Carolina now? Carolina Panthers.
Steve Smith.
Steve Smith, yeah. Remember when he broke that guy's orbital bone in training camp, like punched him in the face? That cornerback, yeah. That I don't want that stuff. Like just ruffle around.
I remember we're at Bill's training camp, and they got Kevin Cobb. This could be the answer, and then he like slipped on a mat or something and got hurt.
Yeah. We're sitting in the bleachers at St. John Fisher for like 20 minutes and be like, why aren't the guys coming out onto the field? Like, what's the holdup? Yeah. And then I think you had Twitter. You were one of the first ones of us to have Twitter. And you're just like, oh, looks like Kevin Cobb went down. Are you kidding me? Of all the players, not that I want anyone to get injured, but really it couldn't have been the 8th string, like punter. Like it had to be like the starting quarterback at the time. Unbelievable, right?
Well, it was probably a competition. I don't know if he was a starter yet.
Yeah, true.
No, I mean,
True.
the Bills weren't that good.
No, they weren't. No. We were hoping there would at least be a competition where, like, the cream would rise. It's just like there's no cream to rise. It's just yours, EJ. So, man, yeah, good times. Another mention for training camp storylines will be Joe Brady. How does he change his offense and put his stamp on the offensive playbook now that he's got an offseason to do it? And he was just on recently with Eric Wood saying, like, it's not going to be a ton different, but he's going to use, some things, use this time to like change a few things and modify a few things. But it sounds like he's going to keep, a decent amount of what Dorsey had in his playbook, because, Brady was very familiar with the playbook when Dorsey, had it, and he learned under Dorsey. So he was there for that. So it's going to be interesting. That's going to be a training camp storyline. Obviously we're watching. Luckily, compared to Babbage, we're a little bit more confident in Brady because they did look good, in the second half of the season. They were running the ball better. Like it was just a lot more balanced offense, and they were winning games. They weren't just relying on Josh Allen to drop back, 7-step drop back and find Diggs open or, whatever. Like there was just a lot more, there were a lot more options, it felt like. So I'm excited about it. I mean, they brought in Curtis Samuel, which we mentioned earlier, and he's going to be taking, Brady said on the episode, he's going to be taking snaps out of the backfield. So like, that's something the Bills really haven't had in offense. So versatility and, I like it. I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure. This could be great. I think the starting receivers, I'm just not sure how the Samuel Shakir dynamic is going to work, because to me, they're both slot receivers. Maybe Shakir could play outside, but
Shakir can play outside. Both can play outside. It just depends on who's better outside.
Yeah, so that's going to be the one dynamic I'm not sure about. But beyond that, a wide receiver is going to be interesting, because those are the two training camp battles: Hollins, Claypool, MVS, Shorter, Hamler, Isabella, and then like 3 or 4 other guys on top of that. So, but that'll be good. And tight end, great. Kincaid. They still got Knox. I like Quentin Morris a lot, and he's still there.
Dude, if Knox is a tight end 2, he might be one of the best tight end 2s in the NFL. He's definitely the highest paid tight end 2 for sure. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, didn't he take a pay cut too?
I think he took a slight pay cut, or it's moving money around or whatever. But yeah, he did. And I think, that doesn't get talked about enough with Dawson Knox being, everyone's thinking about Kincaid. You and I are thinking about Kincaid. We're really excited for his second season. We saw a lot of promise. Honestly, like when Knox went down with the injury, I thought Kincaid shined. I thought finally they're giving him the targets. That guy needs to see at least 7-8 targets a game, in my opinion. At least, minimum of like 4 to 5 minimum, and then, go from there. But, with Knox being in there. I just hope Brady uses a good balance of both of them, and
and
it's not just
also,
Knox as tight end 1 and then Dalton Kincaid gets sprinkled in.
No, I think Kincaid is tight end 1 now, and I think people were questioning after they drafted Kincaid, like if he could block for a tight end, and I thought he threw some great blocks last year. I think he was really good in both roles. Yeah. So I think he's the clear tight end 1 now. And Knox has come a long way. I mean, remember he's like stone hands, and at the beginning. Yeah. But he's still not like in the top whatever tight ends. He's just, I'd say he's a little above average, but for a tight end 2, sure.
Yeah. Still
probably pay too much, even with a pay cut, but that's just how it worked out. Like a corner. Benford was like 6th round, and Elam was the 1st round in the same draft class, and Benford starting. It's just how it worked out.
Yeah. I mean, I think at the time, not that we're going to rehash this, but I think at the time he was a little overpaid, but they didn't have anyone at tight end. It wasn't like they had a Dalton Kincaid on the roster, or, that they could just be like, they could just lose him in the offseason, which is what they were going to do. So,
and to be fair, Knox was 3rd round pick, and Kincaid was in the 1st round. So like, obviously they're, looking to upgrade. So, also at the time, their biggest need was receiver, and they saw him as a receiver. But I think it's just a bonus that like he ended up blocking really well and playing the tight end position really well last year. So I think his targets are going to increase a lot with Stephon Diggs being gone.
Oh yeah, he might. I mean, we don't know. It could be Keon Coleman, it could be Samuel or Shakir. He might be the wide receiver 1 for the team. Like he might be the Kelsey for the team. He might end up having the most targets on the team by the end of the season. If he stays healthy, like that's a possibility. He might end up being like that for Josh Allen.
I could see that. I could easily see that. Actually, if I were to bet on it, I would probably bet that.
I mean, you mentioned
the most targets.
You mentioned specifically the wide receivers, and only one of the top 3 wide receivers has caught passes from Josh Allen. So if you were to say that, like, then it's like Dalton Kincaid versus Khalil Shakir potentially, and it's like, well,
But also Shakir is going to be battling Samuel for targets.
Exactly.
And Coleman's a rookie, so he's kind of an unknown. And they got James Cook, who could catch out of the backfield, but he's not gonna get targeted as much as
Kincaid.
Yeah. I think Kincaid would be my prediction for most targets.
That's a good prediction. I think I'd be up there with you too. Barring injury, I think he does. Who do you think is second? Let's talk about that real quick. Who do you think would be second on the team with targets?
Coleman
over Shakir, you think? Rookie wide receivers have been showing a lot the last few years.
I think Shakir and Samuel are going to kind of split a lot of the targets, but Coleman will get more, if that makes sense.
He does play a position that neither of them can truly play well, right? Like, and that's that, like,
he's got that possession, jump ball, like all those things.
Yeah, he's got like that. He's an X receiver.
And how about this for the Bills, right? So like one of the biggest myths on the catching ability of receivers over the last several years, like, low catch percentage, right? Gabe Davis drops 50% of the balls, and then second half of last year, like all of a sudden Diggs isn't catching them. Coleman in college, like that's one of his biggest things is like he's catching the ball. If it's thrown to him, he's going to catch it. Kincaid, same thing, and he showed it last year. He could catch the ball. Curtis Samuel's another one of those guys. So I think they're moving that direction where they're the GM's like, hey, we need receivers that can catch, not just like athletic freaks that can do all these other things. Number one, they got to catch the ball. So I like that they're moving in that direction, especially from Josh Allen, because he can throw a rocket. So like you have to be able to catch the ball from Josh Allen.
What a novel idea. Can you see them in the draft war room being like, all right, guys, we're looking at wide receiver this year. What are the biggest traits that we want? And if someone's like, honestly, like it'd be nice if they could catch. Like that'd be a plus. I'd take that. Right. And they're like, oh, okay. Yeah, what a novel idea. Like, this sounds good.
Yeah, we even talked about like Knox earlier in his career. He was like,
he was
Scott Chandler was a little bit like that.
Hands. Yeah. Well, Dawson Knox would do it all the time. He'd be like 3rd and 8, right in his hands for a first down, and he'd drop it. Just like
Right. But then you make a spectacular catch. And Chandler was the same way, too. Like, you make this beautiful sideline catch, and then the breadbasket next play would be, yeah.
Dude, not for nothing. That was the second half of the season for Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs, for the most part of his career in general, and as a Buffalo Bill, he caught almost everything that came to him, even when he shouldn't have caught it. And last season, the second half was the first time we ever saw Diggs that just didn't catch him. Either it was mental or emotional. I have no idea. But
and he's going to be at least third in targets in Houston, maybe fourth.
Possibly.
And yeah, they got some good receivers over there. And they redid the whole contract. They only have him for 1 year. They're like, nah, we're just gonna do a 1 year rental on you.
We don't want to risk.
Like they're not. Yeah, they don't want to risk anything.
We know how you are. We know how you've been. Let's yeah.
Well, I don't even think it's about the drama necessarily. I think it's just that he's getting older, and they don't want to take that risk, and that makes a lot of sense. And the Bills get a second round pick next year out of it. If we talked earlier in other podcasts, like he's the dead cap, right? Like, do you want it this year or next year? Well, let's eat it this year so that next year we can go after somebody. But it's the same thing with the draft pick. They're not like, if they held on to Diggs for another year, would they get a second?
No. Another year of the second half of last season happening. So he has 200 targets and 50 catches. No, I don't think that's going to go over well for the next GM. Be like, we'll give you a conditional 7th for him. Yeah.
Yeah, it just happened to work out that way. It just stinks that they didn't have another receiver waiting in the wings that it's not like, oh, let's just re-sign Gabe Davis because he's been amazing. It's like, well, he's just been meh. So, but did they get Samuel? They have Shakir. They drafted Coleman. So, and like I said earlier, they brought in a whole bunch of guys. Hollins, Claypool, MVS, Shorter. Well, they had Shorter. They kind of had Hamlin and Isabella, but they only need one of these guys to kind of hit, and then they have 4 receivers.
KJ Hamler, we haven't talked about KJ Hamler. He could potentially, play a role depending on, how that plans out, or at least the practice squad or something. You never know.
Yeah, he has an interesting skill set. I don't know if it's going to work out, but yeah, they got guys.
So last year, one of the biggest players that took a step forward, which I don't think any one of us were necessarily predicting or expecting, but was Spencer Brown. Spencer Brown took a huge step last year. I mean, he went from being is he going to make the roster, or is he going to keep his starting position, to he's a force at right tackle. I think I never saw that coming. I didn't see Terrell Bernard being an amazing middle linebacker. I was hoping he'd be good, but if you asked me to predict that, I wasn't like, this is definitely going to happen.
I definitely called Terrell Bernard.
Oh, stop. You thought he was going to be good. You're right. You didn't call it. He was going to be
definitely called Bernard.
You like Bernard. You've always been a fan. I was hoping, but I didn't necessarily see it. I guess I'm more more conservative in my takes. I'm not ready to say that this guy's going to be the next, he ended up being better than Tremaine Edmonds, in my opinion. I didn't see that happening in his first year starting. That's crazy, right? But
Spencer Johnson, I was skeptical. I was kind of just on the fence. I wasn't sure how that was going to go, but it definitely worked out.
Oh yeah. I mean, he looked good. I mean, Ed Oliver took a big step forward last season. Spencer Brown, I think, took a bigger step forward just because he had a bigger step to take than Ed Oliver did. But John, let's look at looking at the roster. The Bills have a lot of talent, obviously. A lot of those guys we mentioned, have taken, already taken that big step forward. Is there any guy that you see on the roster being the next guy to take a big step that you could be okay, this guy could be a force this year. We're not expecting it. We're hoping, but we're not necessarily expecting it. Is there a guy you see at any position that could actually be that guy and take the leap?
It's a interesting but yet specific question, because it'd have to be somebody that's been with us for at least a year or two. Because you can't bring somebody in. It's he's looking to take the next step, but they just brought him in, so it can't be.
Yeah, probably not a rookie.
Free agent. No free agent.
No free agent.
They have really good starters. So it's almost like if I pick somebody, it's a depth player that has to play because of injury or something.
Well, let me give you mine, okay? And then maybe it'll it's tough. It's tough at safety because Rapp and Edwards are both, free agents.
Well, Rapp they had, but I don't think he's. I don't think
He
he's
could
gonna.
be, yeah.
I think he's a depth guy. I think Bishop's gonna beat him out. To be honest.
Mhm. I think that's the play too. Like it could be like, I'm not saying this is my guy, but like it could be Cam Lewis all of a sudden stepping up. I mean, he's been on the Bills roster for 4 seasons. Maybe this is the time he finally steps up and becomes a free safety, right? Like he's been solid.
I like Cam Lewis, but I think more of a depth and special teams guy. I don't think he's gonna
Like in spot duty starting, not necessarily
light the world on fire.
You want to
here.
rely on him. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll give you mine, okay? And this isn't like he's been bad or average even. Like he's been pretty good. And that's Osiris Torrance, the right guard for the Bills. Like I like Osiris Torrance a lot. He played every single snap last season, and I think he showed like a lot of flashes. I think he takes that season and he builds on it this season, and he becomes a force at that right guard position. And he becomes all of a sudden, instead of like being solid starter, like good for a rookie. You know how like there's that caveat, like he's good for a rookie because, you know, it's a big change. I think he goes from that to being like good, like not necessarily Deion Dawkins good or Spencer Brown good this last season or Mitch Morse or whatever. But like, I think people look at him as like, wow, he looks really good this season, to making a note of it.
That's too easy. Like, what was the original question?
Who's going to take a big step this next season? Right. So like
he's already taken a big step. He was phenomenal last year.
I wouldn't say phenomenal. Like I think he was okay. Like he started every.
He was really good.
I'd say he was the 4th best offensive lineman on the team. I think it went Morse, Dawkins, Spencer Brown, and then him at guard. But that's because the Bills have a really good offensive line. Like on another offensive line, he might be the better Spencer Brown. Why you keep saying Spencer Johnson?
Is that what I said?
You said it like 3 times.
Obviously, I just said it.
You said it a couple times.
Why is it wrong in my...
Oh, your spreadsheet might be...
Yeah, this is weird. Yeah, because it's Brown. Why did I say Johnson?
Because there was a player named Spencer Johnson on the Bills. It's like a defensive tackle or something.
Oh, I'm such an idiot.
Ago.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, from the Vikings, I think.
Yeah, I just made... Wow, that was so dumb.
John, you're not an idiot. Don't say that about yourself. You're a very intelligent guy. You just had a Dawson Knox moment.
How long has that been wrong in my spreadsheet?
Today's the first time I've ever heard you say that.
Terrible. Yeah, no, this is the first time you just corrected me. You just let it go all those other times.
No, I said it earlier, but you kept talking. I didn't want to interrupt you. You know, don't you hate when people are like, you're on a thought and you're going with it? I'm like, you're like, Spencer Johnson was like Brown. I'm like, I'm not going to say it again.
Oh my God. So what were we even talking about?
Do you want me to stop you next time you do that? Do you want me to just stop you in your tracks and be like, John, it's actually...
Yeah, because that's what I would do to you. I'd be like, no, you're fucking wrong.
Well,
I would do that. I would do that. I would expect you to do the same for me.
Okay. Well, that's one of my least favorite things about you, by the way.
My gosh, how did that get in there?
Call me out on stuff like a jerk. Yeah.
And I'm like blindly reading it like, oh yeah, it's just that's his name. Stupid. All right. So what were we talking about?
There's a few Johnsons on the team too, so don't feel bad.
Wow, that is so dumb. Okay, so you're talking about somebody that can take a big step forward.
Take a big step. I think he goes from
Osiris Torrance. I don't know if he was the 4th best last year. He might be the second or the second. Dawkins is underrated for left tackle. He's number 1, I think.
Then Morris. I think Morris is the second best. And then so I could argue.
I'll give you Morris at 2, and then I'll take Torrance at 3 from last year.
Okay, you could argue. Maybe I give.
But Brown was good too. They're all. So this is a good problem to have. Offensive line is really good.
Before you could only pick out like one player that was actually halfway decent. Remember? Like,
oh my God! Remember when they like brought in Derek Dockery and Langston Walker and Melvin Fowler, and they paid them all this money.
So much money.
And they were all terrible.
They were awful. They weren't even like, okay, it was a passable line. Like they were god awful. Like they were, yeah. Did I ever tell you the story about the girl I was dating at the time, Melvin Fowler, was hitting on her friend because she worked at the bank? Did I ever tell you that story?
I think you did, yeah.
Yeah. Melvin Fowler would text her during games and be like, what are you doing after? Like they'd be like, oh, I'm at the game. Or that's what he did. He gave them tickets. He gave her and her friends tickets. And so he texts this girl and be like, what are you doing after the game? Like, let's meet up. You know, while he was on the bench, like while the offense was not on the field, like he's texting. I'm like, how do players just have like their phones on the sidelines? Like I've never seen a player texting And he was doing that. And I'm like, this guy's not making the team. Like, this guy's going to be done soon. His career is not doing well, So he would go to the bank. That's how he met her, because she was a bank teller, and he would go to the bank and like cash these huge, enormous checks. I'm sure that was like, that's a smart move. That's a good move, man. I wish we could all do that. It's our opening move, right?
It's a money move, no pun intended.
It's a money move. You ever see those like memes of like Jared Goff like wearing his jersey at the bar? And like when he first got drafted by the Rams or whatever, like he's wearing his, I'm like, that's the best pickup line ever. Wearing your jersey. Like, oh, what jersey is that? He's like, that's my jersey. I'm the starting quarterback of the Los Angeles Rams, right? That's the best pickup line ever. So that's what that guy was doing. He just, has a better pickup line than most of us would have going, meeting someone random, right? It's like The League. Did you ever see that League episode where Andre the doctor, or no, was it Taco? Taco would take Andre the doctor's like ATM receipts and show it to like drop it around girls that like he was trying to hit on at the bar, because Andre was like a surgeon, plastic surgeon, right? So he's loaded, and he'd be like, "Oh look, like holy cow," like that's what he would do to get girls. It's smart, genius. So yeah. Anyway, so. Yeah, that's about it. Those are all the big training camp storylines I wanted to hit up. The last thing I'll just mention, I mean, we've been over an hour at this point, and we still have a big announcement to mention, but like Tyler Bass is another storyline that we're all going to be watching, because he did not look good in mandatory minicamps. By all accounts, he was continuing on his poor streak of kicking that he fell into last season. Last season was one of his worst seasons kicking, field goal percentage wise. Since his rookie season. So Tyler Bass is something we're going to watch. Obviously, we've talked in this podcast. We don't blame him for losing that, Kansas City Chiefs game in the playoffs. But at the same time, he didn't help. Like, there were plenty of times they could have used him in the season, like specifically thinking that Philadelphia Eagles loss. Like, got to kick it higher, man. Got to make that 33-yard field goal or whatever it was. Anyway, that's one of the few storylines. John, do you have anything you want to add to that? I mean, just hoping, obviously, he gets better, but kicking's funny. Like, it feels like some of these field goal kickers, when they get to Buffalo, sometimes, Tyler Bass didn't have the great rookie season, but he came on strong the last few seasons until last season. But like, think about Dan Carpenter, Stephen Hauschka, when they came here, they were lighting it on fire, as kickers, and then they eventually lost it. And that seems to be one of those positions that, like, when you lose it, man, like, it's just, sometimes you can't get it back,
Yeah. I mean, it won't matter that much, because they're just going to score touchdowns every drive anyway, so.
Thank you, John. You're always a voice of reason when it comes down to that stuff. I was a little worried. No, I'm not. Thank you. So big announcement for the podcast. We just announced this last week that we are going to partner with Bills Mafia and the Buffalo fan base, which is the official site, Twitter feed, social media feed for Bills Mafia. That's run by, Del Reed, 26 Shirts, all those guys that do a great job of keeping up the channel. Some of you already know, some of you may have just found out by listening to this episode, that Buffalo Rumblings shut down the network in February, I believe. So, we just didn't have a home. So, we've been evaluating a lot of different offers, networks, places, doing it just on our own completely. But there is just like something enticing about not only just being a podcast within, for the Bills Mafia and what those, these folks are creating, but like Justice, like all the people that we've talked to in that network. You're talking about Justice, General Justice Radford. You're talking about the guys at 24/7, Buff Fandemonium, Wandering Buffalo, Justin and Andrew when he was there. Like, there's just a lot of cool folks on this network. So between, this amazing opportunity to work with like the official podcast network and, site for the Bills Mafia, we also have, this really cool group of guys. So, and group of content creators in general that it's really cool to be a part of. There's writers there. I mean, I've interviewed almost all of them, like Dean Kindig for drafting. I've talked to Robin a lot in the past, and everyone knows Robin. So, a lot of great folks over there. Can't say enough good things about them. And then another big announcement is that we're also going to be doing video for the first time very soon. This might be one of our last. We might do audio for another few episodes going into training camp, but we're going to be doing video for the first time, which we've never done as a podcast ever, except when we interviewed Bruce Smith, and that was, I think, one of the only times we ever showed video on of any of us on a podcast. So this will be interesting. It'll be different. It'll be new. Mike, John, and in the crew. I mean, we've been doing this. This will be I think we're going into our 8th season. We started in 2017. This will be our 7th season, 7th full season. We're excited, man. This has been a fun time. We hope you guys obviously all join us to that network to watch our feeds. It'll be posted all over, the Bills Mafia Facebook groups and Bills Mafia fan pages on Instagram, Twitter. There's just a huge following there. So we're glad to be a part of it and to be, help build that channel. And hopefully you guys, check us out there and check out the other shows there as well. Luckily, unlike Rumblings, which was one of my biggest beefs with Buffalo Rumblings, I never had a problem with the content creators there. They're all cool folks. I really enjoyed a lot of them, actually, like cool guys, cool folks, cool girls, everyone. The problem with Buffalo Rumblings at the time was that they only allowed one podcast feed. So it was SB Nation. So literally there was like 20 shows going on each week. So if you even liked, 1 or 10 of the shows, if you didn't want to be bombarded by subscribing to 22 different shows or whatever it was, like you turned off subscriptions. And to be honest, that's what a lot of people did because, you would have to search for Circling the Wagon specifically and make sure that you downloaded it or searched it within the window within 6 hours before someone else, posted a podcast right over us. But we're going to have our own podcast feed along with the Buffalo Fan Base podcast feed. So there'll be 2 different ways that you can listen to us. And obviously you can watch us over all socials and stuff. We'll have our YouTube page going and the Buffalo Fan Base YouTube page going. And, Justice and Mookie Hawkins, if you've ever heard Mookie on the beat, Mookie's a great follow, and he asks some really good questions over at the press conferences. So it'll be cool that he's on the network as well. So looking forward to a lot of new things, a lot of different things, and a lot of new beginnings. And yeah, I hope you guys all follow us there and subscribe and download and all those stuff. Leave us hopefully a 5-star review, and yeah, I'm really excited about that. So John, anything else before we end this training camp primer preview episode? Anything that you want to discuss or anything you want to add to, the announcement or anything?
No, I'm good.
You're like,
I'm excited. I'm ready.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah. You're like, I still can't believe I called him Spencer Johnson like 3 times.
Have I always been doing that? Or
No, just tonight. Literally just the 2 or 3 times I heard
I
it.
must have typed it in wrong on my thing.
You're looking at who you can blame for that. I'm sure. Who
I'm
wrote
blaming
that?
myself. I'm a dummy.
Oh, John, don't say that. Don't say that. You're not that much of a dummy, okay? Just be yourself.
A little bit of a dummy.
No, you're good, man. You're good, man. Well, appreciate John, obviously, coming on the pod to break down these positional groups. I mean, this is going to be our cheat sheet for watching the rest of training camp. And I know new training camp storylines are going to pop up, and we're going to be talking about them with you. So we're not going to record for a week or so because there's a few of us out of town up until about the first weekend of training camp. So lots of fun things to discuss, guys. So I'm excited. I'm hoping that, with our change to Buffalo Fan Base, like this is the year, man. This is the year that we, go to the Super Bowl, that we win it. Luckily, Rumblings had a great following, and like a lot of, people on social media follow them and whatnot. And it's a great following, but being able to grab, hopefully, former Bills players like Eric Wood, like we've talked to in the past, but also new, like actual Bills players, like having the Buffalo Fan Base behind us will definitely help in that regard. So looking forward to that. So thank you guys for listening. Please share with a friend if you like. A lot of you have mentioned that you're sharing it with other friends, or you told friends about us, or other friends have told you that they also listen to us. So want to thank you guys for talking about us and sharing us. So please leave us a 5-star review if you can over Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever you want. Appreciate you guys listening. Signing off for John.
I love you. Go Bills.
Signing off for me, Nate. Go Bills. I love you too. I love you, John. I love you, all the listeners. Love you, all the followers. Looking forward to a tremendous training camp in 2024. And we'll talk to you guys again soon.
Buffalo! Hey, let's go, Buffalo! Hey!
Thank you for listening to the Circling the Wagons podcast. Download and subscribe to us in your favorite podcast service. Email us at ctwpod@gmail.com. That's Charlie Tango Whiskey Pod@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at CTWPod. And most importantly, go Bills!
Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills.
Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills, Nate.
Well, listen, the whole show is called Circling the Wagons. Say no more. I love it.